Okay, hello everybody. This is just going to be just a short treatment. I hope it's going to be short. I'm not really sure until I do it. Of the work of John Coltrane, and we're going to concentrate specifically on the work of the 60s. And before I even attempt this, I want to confess that when you have a person like John Coltrane who dies so young and is such a genius, their output is so great. It's almost like they put 30 years of material into the last 3 or 4 years of their life, as if they know they've got to get it all out. They got to get it all out. And John Coltrane is no exception. You look at Jimi Hendrix's career, total career being only 4 years, and you go, what? Yeah, only 4 years. So this is kind of a pattern where it's Brownie or Bird or any of these great geniuses who die young. Their output is at an astonishing rate. So I will do the best I can to cover some of the high points, but it would take a year for me to cover this if I did it right, okay, with the detail it really deserves. Let's start with 1959, just as we get ready to move into the 60s and the release of Giant Steps. This was the forecast. At this point, John does not have a static professional group that he is performing with in public. And these are studio ventures, and ventures that are groups are assembled for a specific purpose. With Giant Steps, he is dealing with alternative harmonies, extensions, alterations, substitutions, and what we came to know as Coltrane changes. And of course, Giant Steps is still considered one of the most difficult tunes in the jazz repertoire to try to perform and improvise over. Of course, there are some people who would say they figured it all out and, you know, it's just not that hard and this and that. And you know what? They're full of it. Okay? It's a tough tune, and to really do it justice, you got to dig. That's it. There are no shortcuts. Please understand that. There are no shortcuts. Coltrane pursued this line of effort over several years, and several different recordings, and this is John Coltrane, not the average musician on the street. So let's put this all in perspective. In the 60s, he's still kind of playing with Miles Davis and kind of doing his own thing. And he starts putting together his own groups, doing his own recordings at various places when he is at home, when he's between tours with Davis and things like that. And all kinds of people, from Steve Cohn to Victor Feldman to, I mean, you name them, they came through as musicians in this group. He finally settled on what would have been the first iteration of his quartet, which would have included Elvin Jones and Art Davis initially. McCoy Tyner is not quite there yet. And this group is playing and actually, you know, making good music, and Train is continuing to crystallize his vision of what his music needs to be, has to be. Eventually, his homeboy from Philadelphia, McCoy Tyner, emerges from Philly and joins him. There had been a long-standing agreement that at the point that McCoy felt ready, he had an open invitation to join John's group. And so he did. And by this time, John is playing and practicing on the soprano saxophone. And the very first album that they recorded together with this cohesive group, or the first version of this cohesive group, with Art Davis on bass, was My Favorite Things. And of course, that featured John on soprano saxophone, I think maybe for the first time. And then, numerous albums after that. And of course, McCoy Tyner became a feature and a fixture in that group. More experimentation. He was always looking for new sounds, new this. He's studying Indian music, and he's studying meditation, and he's starting to reach out philosophically, and that is also, how should I say this, informing his musical growth and his musical expression. He gets into all sorts of rhythm as a result of studying Indian tabla, and he starts using multiple bass players at times to get drones and counterpoint on the lower end of things, and eventually Art Davis is replaced by Reggie Workman on bass, and that becomes pretty much the cohesive quartet for a time. He lets Eric Dolphy, a very experimental musician, join him, and they do a lot of experimental music. They're moving things very, very far forward, especially in the area of modal jazz and free jazz. And they even do a European tour. And I think the issue is that although they were expecting a great reception, because the Europeans tend to be a lot more open to new ideas in music than we Americans tend to be. They were not so well received in France, which is really a place that gives you an endorsement or rejects you, and it's normally a sign of things to come. That caused a problem. It did lead to Eric Dolphy leaving the group, and I think he ended up staying in France, as a matter of fact, and became another one of the American expatriates. So we're back to the quartet format. Workman is replaced by Jimmy Garrison. We're still using different bass players, including Art Davis at that time. Africa Brass, things like that are being recorded with the multiple bass players. And then somewhere around 1964, one of my favorite albums is recorded that really signifies John's attention to spirituality, which is My Favorite Things. You can actually hear his voice chanting, "A love supreme, a love supreme." I said my favorite things, I'm sorry, "A love supreme." And you can hear him chanting that, and you can tell he's very serious about this spiritual love, this universal love that he is pursuing, both as a humanity within his psyche and his soul, and in his musical expression. The experimentations continue to the point that eventually both Jones and McCoy Tyner leave the group, and Rashid Ali and Alice Coltrane, eventually his second wife, and other musicians form larger groups. I think Freddie Hubbard was around for a while, Pharoah Sanders, and I think Ascension may be one of the most prominent albums from this period of time. All of that is going on, and he continues his pursuit of this universality. Unfortunately, we lost John Coltrane in 1967, and this ended an era of this great creativity, but what it started was an era of catch-up for all musicians who will follow him to this very day. And even on this day, there are musicians who are still playing catch-up to where John Coltrane was in the 60s. That is the mark of true genius. And let's understand that as he pursued his musical experimentations, he was also reaching deep into his soul for universal love and for a working accord with his Creator, the author of all creation. John understood this, and he stands for it, and his music represents it, and that is why he is considered a deity in the Orthodox African Church that uses his music in their worship. Very strong spirituality, very strong passion, and I just don't know what else to say. If you listen to the sound of his horn, how just the sound of one note, you know it's him, and that one note says so many things. Please remember that in his early life, he was raised in a family of preachers. And so every time he played his horn, he was preaching a sermon, not just with a love supreme, but from the very first note out of his horn to the very last, and that ended in 1967. Thank you very much.